Hello, Hockey World. It is Tuesday, June 24th, 2014.
I'm Michael Agello.
I'm Josh Rimmer.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching the Hockey Buzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com live today, coming to you a little bit early because there's stuff going on tonight, including the awards and other things as well. So, but yeah, let's get right to it, guys. We have news on Matt Green's official contract. Josh?
Yes, we do. It is a 4-year deal at $10 million, so about 2.5 per year.
Wow. Okay, that's a good deal for him. I think they did pretty well on that. 2.5. That's not bad for your third or fourth defenseman. It's very serviceable. I like that deal, Mike.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
but Willie Mitchell, obviously, Willie Mitchell, I guess maybe not going to be back with the Kings. We'll see if they can lock him up as well. But if they want Gaborik, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, my camera just fell. Sorry, guys.
That happened to me yesterday.
Josh's camera fell yesterday. So
I know.
Yeah.
I'm figuring on the break now.
Mine will fall tomorrow.
I'm gonna attempt to tape mine in place. I think it's gonna fall at any second. Mike, give us your thoughts on this one while I fix my camera.
Well, I mean, Matt Green is a solid defensive defenseman. Either second or third pairing. I think for the Kings, probably third pairing defenseman. The price point, depending on how they break down the salary, but his average is $2.5 million based on the numbers that Josh just read off. That's a pretty acceptable number for a solid defenseman who's got a couple Stanley Cups under his belt. So I think based on the market that's out there right now, it's actually pretty economical. I think. Based on the Andrei Markov signing yesterday, and I made the point in my blog today. You've got and I just narrowed in on these three veteran defensemen, all just happen to be the 37 years old: Dan Boyle, Stefan Robidas, and Willie Mitchell. Robidas is making around $3.3 million. Mitchell making $3.5 million. Boyle made over $6.6 million. I think that all those guys are going to get fairly close to what they were making, simply because the market is so poor in terms of defensemen. So, a guy like Boyle could make close to $6 million on a short-term deal, and the other guys could make over $3 million on short-term deals. And I'm not talking 1 year. I think they might be able to get multiple years. That's how thin this market is.
Yeah, it's very thin, and this sort of does. I mean, this could set up. I mean, it definitely feels like a hometown discount to a degree, in my opinion. It could set up things pretty interesting for guys like Niskanen. And speaking of Niskanen, the Penguins, this is a bizarre situation, because when you look at what's happening here, basically yesterday Rutherford comes out and says, "Do you think that Niskanen and Jokinen probably won't be back? That it's their time to go to free agency." It's got to be a negotiation tactic because he needs these players. So, in my opinion, I don't know. That's where I am. Mike, you're shaking your head now.
He may need him. He may need him, but Matt Niskanen is going to get over $6 million a year in this free agent pool. He's the best of a bad class. This is like Jason Garrison in Vancouver. There was not a lot of defensemen that year, and he got a contract that now would be reasonable. I think it was close to $5 million, but for Jason Garrison, who had 1 year, it wasn't. Matt Niskanen's had a couple decent seasons. He's not a $6 million defenseman. And there are going to be teams like Detroit and a couple other teams who are looking for right-hand shot defensemen, especially right-hand shot power play defensemen, and he's gonna set the market. So I think that Rutherford realizes he doesn't have a chance to sign him for a competitive wage based on what he's going to get someplace else. So he's just wiping his hands of it. And if he wants to come back after the fact, if he doesn't get those kind of offers, then he's probably open to it. But I wouldn't hold my breath.
It's $6 million. It seems impossible to me. But I mean, you might be right. I mean, $5 million would be unreasonable. But $4 million, $4.5 million. That's probably about where I think it'll end up. But
I'll bet you 2 cookies.
All right, got that bet. Josh, what do you think Niskanen signs for?
Ooh, he had such a great year last year. I mean, you could call him the best Penguins defenseman. I mean, Letang out most of the year with the injuries and obviously him having a stroke. Paul Martin, again, injuries have followed him wherever he's gone the last couple of years, and he wasn't so great. Niskanen was, one of the best, but also remember, when you play on a team with Crosby and Malkin, your numbers are going to be a little inflated.
Yeah.
I expect him between $5 and $6 million per year. Obviously, as Mike said, Detroit would be definitely interested in his services, but Detroit's going to have their pick at the litter of players. It's going to be interesting to see if they go for Niskanen or Boyle or maybe try to make a deal for Phaneuf. I don't know. I mean, they have a lot of different options here, but I think Niskanen is probably going to be paid between $5-6 million, closer to $5 in my opinion.
We should do this between the draft and UFA day. We'll have a little pool with all of us, and we'll go through the top UFAs and predict how much they're going to get. Because I think that'll be fun. Because it's always usually you're pretty safe to bet higher than you think you would. That's usually a pretty safe bet that these guys are going to get more than they should. But for some reason, I don't know. I mean, as good as Niskanen is, I don't think that he's going to get $6 million. We'll find out. We'll find out for sure.
I mean, what's he making right now? I'm actually looking it up right now. Do you guys know offhand how much he's making?
I don't know offhand. I thought it was $375 for some reason, but it might be wrong.
He is making
$2.3 million.
Oh, you beat me, you jerk.
What was it? 2.3?
2.3.
Yeah, you see, 2.3. That's that's.
Yeah, but he's a 27-year-old right-hand shot, unrestricted free agent defenseman. One of the next best defensemen in the pool under the age of 30 is Anton Strawman. Can you say cash register?
Yeah, no, there's no question. I mean, he's going to get more than he should, but whether or not
4.6 maybe his salary gets doubled around 4.6 per year maybe.
I don't think he makes any less than $5, and I think you're gonna have 4 or 5 teams competing over him because again he's the only one of these free agents out there, or only one of these defensemen out there who you don't have to give up anything other than money to sign him, and there are plenty of teams out there that actually have cap room. Now, a team like Boston's not going to get involved because we'll talk about that in a little bit. They're in the hole $7 million because of bonuses, and they may have to make some deals to get under the cap.
Yeah,
so it's not going to be a team like that. But there are plenty of teams like Phoenix, the Islanders, out there, who have tons of cap room. They have their own individual salary structure, but they have tons of cap room, and they can spend $6 million on a defenseman.
It's true. If Flyers extended
Braden Shen.
Yes, I'm sorry, I just got to text at the same time. I apologize. Yeah, the Flyers extended Braden Shen for 2 years. A good signing for the Flyers. I'm a big Braden Shen fan. He's been a little bit inconsistent at times, but has shown a huge amount of upside. I don't think, unfortunately, for the Braden Shen fans out there, and you know who you are, that this means that he's absolutely going to stay with the Flyers. I'll tell you that right now. Braden Shen is one of those guys who's definitely available at this point if the right move were to happen or the right defenseman were to be available. This signing happening now almost makes me wonder if that's more the case, because they're getting him done so that if they need that chip, they're going to have it. No one wants to sign a guy or trade for a guy who's not signed. Even RFAs are nerve-wracking because you never know what you're getting. Now you know what you're getting with Braden Shen for the next 2 years. That's a 2-year contract. It's a good tradable contract. That gives you 2 solid years. So I'm not positive that Braden Shen won't still be moved. Hearing Mason Raymond's name mentioned a lot with the Flyers right now as well. So still hearing Justin Schultz name mentioned as we talked about yesterday. I still think that deal could happen. I think what's going to hold that up, or what is holding that up right now, is that Edmonton's still talking to Nikitin about a contract. If they can get him signed, then Justin Schultz becomes suddenly more available. Josh?
A couple things I want to touch on. First of all, non-hockey related, LeBron James is now a free agent. He's opted out of his contract. That's kind of interesting. I'm not a big basketball guy, but
no, I think he fit really well with the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah,
Whoops.
So it'll be more boring TV with the decision part 2. But
Oh
anyway,
God, help us. Yeah.
let's move away from basketball. I talked about Hartnell yesterday and the report that James Myrtle reporting that Hartnell asked for a trade, but it came out later yesterday in Hartnell's quotes that the Flyers approached him 5 days ago, or now 6 days ago, and said, you don't fit in the plans. We're going to move you. And he was pretty pissed off about it.
He was.
And he had a great quote yesterday saying when Columbus approached him about coming to Columbus, his quote was something along the lines of, it feels good when another team wants you, when the team you're with doesn't, or something like that. But
yeah, no, he was devastated. I mean, I actually heard. I actually talked to Flyers players who used the word devastated with Hartnell. That, it wasn't. I mean, and I didn't think yesterday when that report came out that he asked for a trade. It didn't make any sense to me, based on knowing Hartnell. And I mentioned that at the time. And you never know, of course. You never know what's going on behind just closed doors. We know he doesn't get over. Berube's not a big Hartnell fan, but I had a couple people who say he was devastated, and that it was obviously the other way around. Umberger wanted to trade, but not Hartnell. But yeah, Hartnell. He's a great quote. He was great with the media yesterday. He's going to be fantastic in Columbus in general.
And you know what? I feel bad for the Flyers because when he plays the Flyers now, he's going to be a Flyer killer.
Yeah. He could be. He's one of those guys who scores big goals, and especially big goals against the Penguins. He's a Penguins killer. So Columbus will love that. Obviously, that's what Penguins killer. Have Hartnell was on that team last year, who knows? That really, he was definitely a Penguins killer all year. So the Chicago Blackhawks, the talk that I've been hearing today as well is more along the lines of, they're not opposed to trading Patrick Sharp, but only if they know they can trade for Jason Spezza. So I keep hearing that name being mentioned. Whether or not that can happen, they could possibly move Patrick Sharp at that point.
I think I'd rather have Sharp, wouldn't you?
Well, they just have no centers, and it's just Sharp is just not, they're just not a center. I'm with you on that. I mean, I would rather have Sharp. I wouldn't mess around too much if I was the Blackhawks. I mean, they're really just a goal away from probably winning another Stanley Cup. So, this is a team that I wouldn't screw with, but they definitely, and they're losing hands. So they do need a center,
right.
A true second line center.
Well, that's the problem, Mac, is the fact that they're not capped out, but they're pretty close. They have all their players locked up to long-term deals except Taves and Kane, which they're going to get locked up, hopefully for them this summer. I believe Sharp is making a little less than $6 million. He's 32 years old. He's the type of player who starts to drop off. The type of game that he plays starts to drop off in his early 30s. So they may be thinking of trading him a year early and getting something for him, and they do need, they were the reason that they lost. One of the reasons that they lost to the Kings was because the Kings won the battle up the middle. They were 4 deep at center, and essentially the Hawks were 1 deep at center, and they need a number 2 center behind Taves to take some of the offensive pressure off of him.
Right. We clearly can recall also that Patrick Sharp struggled in the playoffs to score. And, we see these older players, and Patrick Sharp, it's hard to – I remember when Patrick Sharp came in the league with the Flyers. I just can't picture him as a 32-year-old. It's just one of those old, makes me feel old type situations.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Sharp, when he came into the Flyers, was like the nicest kid, but he was definitely a kid, And I always thought he was super intelligent. Obviously, he's a handsome man. Yeah, it's hard to imagine Patrick Sharp as colleagues saying Patrick Sharp could be slowing down because in the playoffs because of his age, but he did have, you also remember Patrick played in the Olympics last year too, so played a lot of hockey.
But we're all getting old. We're all getting old, Dak. I mean,
we sure are, Mike. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Claude Lemieux's son is being drafted. Sammy Kapanen's son, Michael Nylander's son. I mean, these are guys that I watched as
hockey with Sammy Kapanen's son. I'll have you know. My in-laws, which are still my in-laws. I was going to say my former in-laws. My current in-laws. I'm still married very happily, and I love my in-laws dearly. Had a house that was whose backyard backed up to Sammy Kapanen's backyard when he was a Flyer. So we would all play street hockey once in a while out there. So I mean, I know, yeah. So and that makes me feel super old, man.
And his hockey skill was not stunted by that experience, Zach.
I was better than him when he was 6. I'll just let you know. I'll let you know that I could run circles around that kid when he was 6 years old.
There you go.
I don't know. I think he's going into the NHL draft. I should be the one who's drafted.
Okay.
Yes, there you go. So a team to watch out for also right now is Winnipeg. I've been told a lot about, Winnipeg has been really quiet in this offseason. Cheveldayoff, I was a big Cheveldayoff fan when he was with the Chicago Wolves, and I was a big supporter in him getting a job. He's really been less than spectacular as a GM, I think. There's things he could have done that he hasn't done, but I think this summer is his summer to make it or break it with this job.
Well, I mean, all he's really done is lock up, and this is, I guess it's good, is lock up his core players. He's locked up Bogosian, he's locked up Little and Wheeler and Kane and Bufflin. He's got them under long-term deals, but if it's not a winning formula, which it hasn't been, I mean, they played well when Paul Maurice took over as coach, but they didn't make the playoffs. And all this stuff with Evander Kane. I mean, I think Evander Kane is the guy who's going to go. I mean, we've heard about this forever, so it's not exactly a bold prediction to say Evander Kane is going to go. But I have a feeling that if they get themselves, a deal where they could get a high first-round pick, I think Evander Kane will go. And just feeling the New York Islanders. I have a feeling that with Molson gone, with Vanek being traded, they need a winger for John Tavares, and Evander Kane would fit that bill pretty good.
He would. I agree with you. He would really be a good face for the Islanders.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a hard. He's such a great player. Reminds me of Mike Modano in so many ways. And I think that Evander Kane just hasn't. This is the year he's got to show that he is that kind of a player, because he's had moments where he's looked great and moments where he's looked average. But when he looks great, he looks really great. He's a really good player. Josh, your thoughts on Evander Kane?
I've thrown this out there a million times. I still think the Flyers are interested in him. I don't know if they will be able to make a deal for him, but I've been told that he most likely will be on the move from Winnipeg. Didn't mesh with Paul Maurice's system, and I don't think Paul was a very big Evander Kane fan. Him missing a meeting definitely rubbed him the wrong way, and when you miss meetings, that really pisses off coaches. That's when he was the healthy scratch last year, this past season. I'm sure there's a few teams out there that would be interested in his services, being a top 5 pick, and what was he, third overall? Drafted third overall by Winnipeg?
Yeah, something like that.
He definitely would get interest from a lot of the teams that are building with youth. I would not be surprised at all to see him traded at the draft. I said that last year. It didn't happen, but it's possible it could happen this year.
Yeah, it could. I mean, I think the Flyers have interest in them for sure, but they're not alone in that interest. I think the Rangers, Islanders would be good fits as well, and Bruins too if they could figure out their cap situation. The Bruins have always liked Evander Kane as well, but right now cap wise they look really obviously maxed out. There's not going to be something. What else do you have here, Josh?
Dreger threw out earlier today that teams are continuing to call Pittsburgh. He said that he spoke. Dreger said that he spoke with Jimmy Rutherford, that they're getting calls on James Neal. Would Pittsburgh move Neal? I think that's a possibility. Obviously, Rutherford. I think we talked about this already, either before the podcast or during the podcast, that Rutherford said that both Jokinen and Niskanen will not be back. So it's going to be interesting to see if James Neal is traded out of Pittsburgh. Also, Darren said that a lot of general managers are calling the New York Islanders about Josh Bailey.
Yeah,
this is another guy that...
Yep, I agree. Bailey's been on the market for a little while, not just this year, but before.
So much upside with him, guys. So much upside. But he's never really reached there. He showed flashes last year, probably one of his best years this past season, at least during a stretch. But the kid's got so much upside if he could ever put things together.
Yeah.
Well, I think the reason that a lot of GMs are calling him about Josh Bailey, not only because of the untapped potential, it's the fact that he's locked up for 4 more years at $3.3 million, which with the cap escalating is chicken feed. It's not a lot for a quality player. Now that being said, he's never scored more than I think his career total is a career high is 16 goals. I mean, he's never scored 20 goals in his career. Now, granted, there hasn't been a lot of talent around him on Long Island, and if you do play him with talented players, maybe those numbers will go up. But he really hasn't bloomed with the Islanders, and maybe a change of scenery is needed. But I mean, I would be skeptical if I was a team trading for him whether he can really produce significantly more than he has right now.
He had more points last year than he has in his career. 38 points, but 16 goals is the most he ever scored. That was 09-10.
Yeah, and that's not going to do it. I mean, he's got.
And he's a 9th overall pick, guys.
He's got to be better than that. Exactly. The 9th overall pick.
24 years old. He's 24 years old. I mean,
he's got to be a 25, 30 goal scorer at this point.
Yeah. Right. Obviously, the Islanders should have sent him down to the minors and should not have kept him up 08, 09. He's 24 years old, right?
Yeah. I mean, they really did. I agree with you. An interesting trade rumor that keeps popping up. This has been popping up since last year at the deadline. Is the Wild have a whole bunch of interest, and I mean, everybody you could say everybody's interested in this player, but the Wild have always really been interested in Oposo. Now, whether or not they can get him or not, but he's apparently, I was told a while back that with Parise and Suter and Oposo were sort of a trio, like they all hang out together in the off season. They're buddies, and Oposo really wants to play in Minnesota.
Right, he's from St. Paul.
Right, Oposo had a hell of a year last year, obviously, and should have been on the U.S. Olympic team. Got really screwed there, and is a great fit. Is a great fit with the big man there in New York. But I think that the Wild have a lot of young players too. As we talked about yesterday, a lot of entry-level type contracts that could really be intriguing to the Islanders, because the Islanders, window of opportunity is still, a good 5 years away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that what the Islanders would probably be looking for in a deal for Oposo, and like you said, I mean, he was their leading scorer last year, but that was because Tavares got hurt at the Olympics. They would probably want one of the promising young players, probably a guy like Charlie Coyle, to replace Oposo. And then I'll bet you anything they would want a young defenseman as well, maybe a Matthew Dumba, because their depth on defense. I mean, they have Griffin Reinhart coming. They do have Hamonic. They do have Calvin DeHaan. So they have some young guys, and I think they need to. The whole purpose of the Dan Boyle deal was to add a veteran to help those young guys, sort of bloom and mature as defensemen. But they need bodies too, and I think that they probably need a couple players to trade Oposo. Otherwise, I don't think the Islanders would be willing to trade a guy who could be a power forward in this league.
They do, and it's funny that you say, Oposo's the leading scorer because Tavares gets hurt. Yet Oposo's, biggest rap has always been he only gets a lot of points because he plays with Tavares, right? So, I mean, it's kind of a, I got to give the guy credit for last year. He had an amazing year for the Islanders in a year that the Islanders in general were really off. For what they should have been. We saw them progress the year before, and they should have continued in that pattern, but they didn't. For various reasons, lots of injuries, and then of course Tavares getting hurt at the Olympics really killed them as well. But they were already not a good team at that point.
Yeah.
But Josh, go ahead.
Well, let me just finish that point. I'll finish the point on the Islanders. The one thing with the Islanders, though, is I think that there's going to be a lot of short-term thinking with them because of the fact they don't have their own pick in 2015. The Sabres have their first-round pick, so a deal like that for Oposo, they would have to bring back somebody who could replace him. I think they're going to be going out and they're going to be trying to sign free agents, making deals, maybe trading a guy like Ryan Strome, one of their first-round picks, who's a really good young prospect. But they need to win now, and if they could get a guy like an Evander Kane for a young player who hasn't made their team yet, that would give them a step up on at least being respectable next season and avoiding giving the Sabres a top 5 pick in the draft.
Most definitely. And, I know we should get Dan Petru on to talk to the Islanders at some point, and we will, Dan, because he's a good guy, and he's a really really knowledgeable person. As is D. Carl, would be great on a podcast too. Maybe we should have an Islanders day. Josh, what else do you have?
Back to Josh Bailey, guys. As a 17-year-old, his final year in the OHL, he was with the Windsor Spitfires. Had probably his best season ever, including the NHL. I know it's a different league, but 29 goals, 67 assists, 96 points, playing with a 15-year-old Taylor Hall, who had 84 points. Maybe the Oilers could be showing interest if there was that much chemistry between the two.
I remember that. It's funny. I forgot about that. I remember that. That has come up before. The Oilers at one point did try to get him, but it was about 2 years ago, and it just fell apart right around the deadline. But that has been out there for sure.
Well, one of the other names that Drager had mentioned this morning in terms of the perennial guy who has been talked about at drafts in terms of trade possibilities is Sam Gagner, who I believe has 2 years left and a little under $5 million. Now, I like Sam Gagner as a player. I think he's a highly skilled guy. I mean, any guy who can score, 8 points in a game has a lot of skill.
And if you're in that division, man, if you're in the Chicago Blackhawks division, you go for him because he kills the Blackhawks.
Right, but you know what? He's not a $5 million player. And, maybe, if you're talking Josh Bailey and you're talking the Edmonton Oilers, maybe a guy like Sam Gagner is a player who would fit into the Islanders' plans. I'm just saying, I think this is the year that Gagner is finally going to get moved, because I think that the Oilers are looking to add defensemen, and that might be a guy that they try to flip for a defenseman, if anything. But we'll see what happens on the draft floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gagner is going to get moved as well. A team I would really keep looking at with Gagner is Tampa. I've heard Tampa really likes him. Yzerman really likes him, which would make sense. I mean, and Sam Gagner, he probably would be a much better player in a situation like Tampa, and you could see him playing, with some of the guys on Tampa really well. Like, he's such a good playmaker, such a good passer. I'd love to see him and Stamkos play together. But another team, Carolina, is also interested in him as well. So, and Buffalo is too. So, but Buffalo, it's more of an immediate deal, like we talked about before.
And with Buffalo, it's the cap floor too.
Right. Now, today we said we were going to talk about Toronto and Anaheim, but since the podcast is getting cut short a little bit today because of some other things that are pressing us up against, why we had to squeeze it in early, I think we're going to do that tomorrow, guys.
Okay.
So that we don't, because I want to give those are two teams that deserve the amount of time we can give them. Josh, go ahead.
I got something great we could talk about. What'd you guys think of who went in the Hall of Fame yesterday?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And I would like to touch on that. And then I'm going to have a rumor blog up in the next hour after this, so you guys know that'll be my update. Normally I do the blog first and then the podcast second, so just reversing it today. We talked about Forsberg yesterday, but I'm such a big fan of Forsberg's. My favorite Forsberg thing that he did was not like one of the plays. I mean, he had a couple games he just dominated, and he won a couple games for Colorado. He won a couple games when he came to Philly for Philly too. But my favorite Forsberg thing was when somebody would try to check Forsberg and they would bounce off of him, and that player would end up on the ground. That happened constantly throughout his career. That's gonna be my memory of Forsberg, was that play. Yeah.
He was one of the only Swedish players at least one of the first ones that come to mind that it was not afraid to, go on the corners and mix it up. And he was aggressive, and I mean, he was probably a lot of people considered him a power forward, and not many Swedish players.
No, he was a big time power forward, and
not many Swedish players were known as power forwards.
No, he was very atypical Swede, but absolutely worshipped in Sweden. I mean, just. Beyond, any other player. I mean, we have seen some Swedes, I would say. Backstrom has a little bit of him in Forsberg in him, but, the power forward aspect of his game and the ability of how tough he was, and he looked like when you just talked to him, he had like a jaw that could just bite through a wire. Like he was a tough guy. You didn't want to hang out. You didn't want to wrong him, but a sweetheart of a guy too, and really, in Philly, my biggest memory of Forsberg was in Philly in that year that the Flyers just were terrible, that they finished last by a lot, and ended up getting Van Riemsdyk instead of Patrick Kane after that year. But that whole year, Forsberg was the captain of the Flyers and ended up getting traded at the deadline to Nashville. But Forsberg in Philly, such a bad season. His foot was terrible. It was bothering him all the time. And so yet he had to deal with the media after every game, and it was the same thing, why did you lose? How's your foot feel? Why'd you lose? How's your foot feel? And he never once, was obnoxious about it. He could have. I mean, I was getting frustrated for him just sitting there, and you guys, I was just getting embarrassed to be in these scrums with people asking him the same question game after game. But classy all the way through, and then also covering him in the last Olympics in Vancouver when he didn't have much left. But just his presence, when you asked other players on Team Sweden whether or not Forsberg should be there, they were like, how could Forsberg not be here? It wasn't even a matter of how good he was, or how good he still is, or can he still skate. He's Peter Forsberg, and his presence in the locker room means that much. And I will tell you this, that he only played, a couple months for the Nashville Predators after that trade. But there are still players on that Predators team, including Shea Weber, David Legwan, Chris Mason, who was a goalie at the time, who will tell you that it was the most impactful player they've ever been around, just even for a couple months. Watching his work ethic, watching how much he took losing to Hart, and just how he carried himself. It changed a lot of the Predators players. They really felt like they gained so much from that. So Peter's not. That was obvious. Hasek, we talked about yesterday. Unquestionably one of my favorite goalies of all time. Just for the way he, his unconventional ways about him. I love that part of Hasek's game. We don't have really anything. Jonathan Quick's probably the closest thing we have to that now.
Tim Thomas,
yeah, but Jonathan Quick's more Hasek style. Tim Thomas is more like a Bernie Perrant style. Like Tim Thomas is a really old school goalie. But yeah, I'd say Hasek and Rob Blake. I'm a little bit surprised on. I thought
Recchi would have gotten in before him.
Yeah, or Roenick even.
There's definitely a backlog of quality that in the next few years. I mean, like you said, Roenick, Lindros, Alexander McGillney,
Dave Anderson,
Housley. I personally think Curtis Joseph should get in, but I'm in the minority there. I think Don Cherry will end up being a builder eventually, and maybe hopefully in the next couple of years. Hopefully they will do it while he's still alive, rather than what they did with Pat Burns. Finally righting a wrong, but I still think that the Hall of Fame had a little egg on their face, or the selection committee had a little egg on their face with how that was treated.
There's no question.
I heard they had the phone call of the Hall of Fame committee calling Pat Burns' wife and telling her about that he got in, and she, rightfully so, was pretty emotional, and just listening to that, I got a little emotional listening to that, to be honest with you. I talked to Bill Waters yesterday, and I said, hey, Pat Burns got in, and he said it's about time. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I agree with Mike. It's something that should have been done, before he passed away, and I was hoping that he was going to get in that last year before he did. I mean, they did it. They did it with Roger Nielsen, and they should have done it with Pat, because we knew Pat would go in. And Lou Lamoriello, very vocal. He was on the Hockey Central at noon today. Very ecstatic that he got in, and everyone's just been wondering, what took so long.
Yeah, it's a Hall of Fames are a strange thing. They have these really steadfast rules obviously for reasons, because it's otherwise too many people would get in. But then there's instances where you have to kind of look beyond those rules. And I've talked to people who've been on the committee. Kevin, obviously, Evan, who joins us a lot, is on the committee. Eric Tahashik's on the committee still. And these guys are, it's very tricky. It's a very tricky thing to. It's like, where to draw those lines. Pat Burns, Fred Shiro, these kind of guys. They're obviously Hall of Famers when you think about them. You just put them in your head, and they're Hall of Famers, right? Yeah. But it's like, how do you, there's only one builder a year, that kind of thing, and it's just, these rules are really tough. And then every year there's more great players. There's more great every year. So if you miss it at one point, you can end up like Fred Shiro for 20 years not getting in, or Pat Burns for 4 or 5 years where he should have been in. So yeah, it's really a hard thing to do. I do have admiration for that committee. I've been around when they've talked about at media meals where Tahashik and others have, and others have sat there and talked about what goes on, and it is really complicated and it is really intense. These meetings, these when they deciding on these players, they all have to make their own pitches, and it gets really intense. So I think at the end of the day, they get more right than wrong. But this is Rob Blake is definitely a curious one for me. But that's just, I was never a huge Blake fan. He's obviously was a great player for a long time, but not as impactful as some other players that I think could have been in
Mark
there.
Recchi. Recchi should.
Well, Recchi. I mean, when you think about Recchi's point totals, I mean, they were just crazy. He he put up 120 points for the Flyers one year. Just like it's just, and I mean, it wasn't just on the Penguins and the high-flying Penguins. He was putting up points.
He was one of the best Montreal Canadian players in the last 10 years probably.
Right. Won 2 Stanley Cups.
20 years. Sorry.
And I think one factor with Blake, I mean, I think Blake is, I think he's a Hall of Famer, no doubt. I'm a little surprised he got in this early, but he played most of his career, I think all of his career in the Western Conference, and
that's true, Mike. You're right.
Yeah, there is sort of that Eastern Conference sort of like blindness to the dominance of players who played primarily in the West. So I think he's a great player.
It's almost reversing. It's almost, I know it's reverse discrimination sort of, but kind of that, like, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, he's definitely in the West, so we got to because Roenick, who played in the East, I don't know. I think of Roenick, when I think of Jeremy Roenick or Rob Blake, I think of Roenick as a Hall of Famer first.
Right.
I think of Lindros. I would put Blake in there before Lindros, but I do think Lindros is a Hall of Famer. I don't know. That's just, and Modano. But Modano is an obvious one. I mean, he was incredible, and I also would have liked to have seen Modano and Roenick go in together, especially with Kevin, who covered them so well as a USA guy. It would have been very appropriate. It's very appropriate that Modano and Kevin are going in together. So
Blake was the only Canadian, by the way.
What was that?
Blake was the only Canadian player that went in.
Oh, that's intriguing. Yeah, that's not often that happens.
And Roenick, he played most of his career. He started in the depth of his career. The quality years were in Chicago. That's Western Conference, but it's also Central Time Zone, and people in the East can watch Chicago games. If you're playing LA and San Jose, I mean, most of the East Coast is asleep.
And when they were playing, we're talking about hockey. When Blake was playing in LA, let's admit it, were some of hockey's dark years for television. As far as West, like now we do get all the West Coast games. We get them a lot. We get a lot of games played. But during Blake's heyday, that was when the ESPN and NHL weren't always, they weren't always getting it together. And when ESPN had them on, they didn't always have them on all that much. And there would very rarely be a doubleheader game like we get now, where we have a second game. So yeah, I agree. I didn't see Blake play nearly as much, and most people didn't see Blake play nearly as much. So that's a really good point.
Guys, this might have been actually the only year where you had 4 different nationalities going in. You had 1 Canadian, 1 American, 1 Swede, and 1 Czech. I mean, I don't think that's been done in a Hall of Fame election year before.
The Russians are protesting. Vladimir Putin wanted it.
Yeah.
Hey, one other thing I want to throw at you guys. What do you think about Bill McCreary going in as an official? I was actually wondering maybe if they thought about putting Kerry Fraser in first, then having Kerry and Burns go in the same year. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, the Toronto chapter would have a problem with that one.
I always liked McCreary. I liked Fraser too. Actually, I'm not a real anti-official guy in any way, so I really think they're all pretty good. And I think Kerry Fraser will get in there eventually. I do think he will.
I would think he will too.
I don't think Paul Stewart will get in there eventually, which is a crime, because I think he was, but I think he's got his enemies, So there's still politics involved in this. No question about that.
Every official has their enemies. I've talked to many officials, and it's funny. They're just like players, basically. Everyone. Everyone has their favorites, and everyone has their not so favorites. But Bill McCreary, guys, Bill is one of the nicest guys. I've had many occasions gotten to sit down with him. I've booked him on many shows before and gotten to know Bill really well. And he's the salt of the earth. He's really a really stand-up guy, and I couldn't be more happy for him. And I talked to him yesterday, right after he got elected, and he was pretty emotional and pretty excited, and didn't really have the words to say, the right words to say, and he just said he wanted to collect his thoughts, and just very happy for him. He's a great man.
And when I picture you talking to me, of course, you just picture that big, mustache and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He was such a classic referee, in every which way. It was like right out of the movie Slapshot to me. Like he was like the guy from the 70s and 80s. It was just classy. But we are out of time, guys. We appreciate everything. Tomorrow we'll be back probably early again tomorrow. I will let you guys know exactly on the times on that one, as well. But enjoy the award ceremonies tonight, and I will have a rumor blog up shortly. So remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey. Talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.